Hey YouTube, Richard Scott here. So I'm trying a different way of feeding bees in a way where I don't have to fool with it every day. And that's kind of nice to be able to do something to leave it alone for a while. Trying to streamline things just a little bit. So I'm trying this top hive feeder where it's basically an inverted feeder feeding the bees sugar water. And I don't have to refill the cans every day. I don't have to worry about robbing. And this seems to be working so far. So let me show you what I'm talking about. He's bringing in pollen. It is mid-October. We're in goldenrod season here in central Alabama. But what I ended up doing was I made my own hive top, and this is just specifically for feeding. I use a paint can. I found these at our local hardware store. These are brand new paint cans. They're coated on the inside. They may rust a little bit on the outside, but on the inside they are coated and won't rust. But I used 1/2 inch plywood. And I found these 1x2 strips that I used basically to make a square around my hive here. And I did drill vent holes on the front and back. These are, I think, 3/4 inch holes. I think that's right. Or maybe that's a 1-inch hole. And make sure if you do this, drill upwards, not downwards. That'll keep the rainwater out, so if it rains, it won't drain into your hive. And I did staple a little screen on there as well. But I'll show you what I did. And by the way, if you do this, very important to put a brick on top of this, because once they drink all of this, that can's very light. Any little light breeze will toss the can off. So it's always a good idea to weight it down just a bit. But you'll see under here, the bees can get to it. I've got a 2-inch hole drilled under here, and the bees can drink from the bottom of this can. Now these little tiny pinholes, I've got about 4 or 5 little pinholes poked into the top of this can, which is inverted, so it's going to be on the bottom. And the bees can go up and drink this without being disturbed. You can see how the bees are down in the hive there. And there's actually enough space between the plywood and the top of this can due to how the lid's made to where bees can crawl around under here. So it just makes life a little bit easier in feeding. And one good thing I found about this is you don't have to worry as much about robbing, because there's a long distance away from their entrance there to where the food source is up here. And by the way, it's not leaking. That was just some water on top of the can. When I tilted it over, it drained off. So it seems like it's working really well, but I'm going to keep trying this and just seeing how things go. But there's so many different ways of feeding. You know, some people use these entrance feeders where you stick right here on the front of your colony, but it's so easy to get robbing going on. And those things seem to leak. I've never had a lot of luck with those because of leaking. But it seems to be working so far so good. And I will paint these, by the way. I was just trying this out. I've got I'm probably going to use just a barn paint. Something cheap, but just to keep these where they'll last longer in the weather. But I use obviously my blocks to weight this thing down. But anyway, make sure you always keep something on top of that can, so when it goes empty, it will go light. And the reason this doesn't leak out, it's inverted. What happens is you create a vacuum. There's going to be a little bit of drippage at first, and you create a vacuum, and that will keep the liquid suspended in there. Well, the bees can stick their little straw-looking tongues in there and drink the sugar water. And you saw that. That's what they're doing. There you go. Just trying different methods of feeding, trying to figure out what works best, what will last longer. And the good thing about these cans, these are 1-gallon cans. It's going to take a while for the bees to drink all of that. And especially since there's just one colony taking this. I have done the outdoor feeding where I sit a tub out, and goodness, I've had bees take 20 gallons in just a day. Maybe even less than that, maybe 4 or 5 hours. Bees have taken, 20 gallons of sugar water. Well, that's kind of not very efficient, because I found that my stronger colonies would take all the sugar water before my weaker colonies would get a chance to get some. And I want my weaker colonies to have a good food source too, so that's very important. And by the way, this box here, this is a single deep brood box. I don't have a super on this one. This one is actually a really late season cutout I did, and they didn't have time to build honey storage, so I'm feeding these bees to make sure they got a good source of food going into wintertime. And you can actually feed these bees through the wintertime. It doesn't really matter. Here in central Alabama, it doesn't really get cold enough to worry about top feeding. I know if you're in a colder climate, you'll want to put you a deep box on top of this and kind of have this encased to keep it, I guess, to keep it warm. I don't know how cold it has to be for that to freeze, but I know some people have done that, and I've seen that done. But I know some use 1 or 2 gallon buckets, but it just seemed to be cheaper for me to use the paint cans, and they don't leak. So far so good.